In my previous life, I didn't teach. I didn't save lives. I didn't write novels. I cleaned up disasters. When a company was one scandal away from collapse, they called me. When an executive was about to be devoured by public opinion, I stepped in. When the truth was ugly and the lies were louder, I decided what the world would believe. I was a crisis management strategist. My job wasn't to be liked. It was to control damage, redirect blame, and survive storms others couldn't. That was my skill. And that was why dying the way I did felt almost ironic. It happened on an ordinary night. I was alone in my apartment, laptop open, reviewing a case involving a political family entangled in a bribery scandal. Every word mattered. Every leak could ruin lives. My phone buzzed, low battery. I reached for the charger. The moment the metal touched the phone, a blinding white light swallowed the room. It wasn't heat. It wasn't pain. It felt like my nerves were being pulled apart, one by one. I remember screaming. Then falling endlessly into darkness. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on a bed far too soft and far too unfamiliar. The air smelled faintly of herbs and old wood. Before I could move, a bronze mirror was placed in front of my face. I froze. The woman staring back at me wasn't me. Her face was round, painfully round. Her cheeks swollen. Her eyes half buried in flesh. Her lips thick, trembling. My chest tightened. I tried to scream. The voice that came out was hoarse, slow, and weak. Panic surged through me. I tried to sit up. I couldn't. My body felt like it had been stuffed with wet clay, heavy, unresponsive, foreign. In that moment, I understood something I never believed would happen to me. I hadn't been kidnapped. I hadn't been drugged. I had crossed worlds. Memories that weren't mine flooded in violently. This body belonged to Han Siorin, 17 years old. Legitimate daughter of Chief State Counselor Han Myung-ho, a man whose words could shake the royal court. And yet, his daughter was a disgrace. Han Siorin was known across the capital for one thing. She was grotesquely fat. Not plump. Not chubby. Fat to the point of ridicule. She couldn't walk 10 steps without gasping. Servants had to support her like a collapsing pillar. Noble daughters whispered and laughed behind silk sleeves. Worse still, she was foolish. She couldn't memorize court etiquette. Couldn't manage household affairs. Couldn't even tell when she was being mocked. Her stepmother despised her openly. Her half-brother bullied her without restraint. Her father ignored her. There was even a rumor that he once said, "If she did not carry my blood, she would have been discarded long ago." That sentence crushed something deep in my chest. But nothing compared to the final memory. A confession. Public. Humiliating. Han Siorin had foolishly confessed her feelings to Prince Consort candidate Min Yiwon, a rising noble star admired by half the capital. He rejected her with a smile. In front of everyone. He called her unsightly. Said she disgusted him. Said she should learn shame before dreaming of affection. The banquet hall laughed. Han Siorin fled. She locked herself in her room. She refused food for 3 days. On the 4th night, she burned with fever. No one came. By morning, she was dead. That was when I arrived. I stared at the mirror for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Because panic was useless. And despair was a luxury. In my previous life, I had learned one rule. When everything collapses, the first thing you do is assess the damage. So I did. This body was damaged, severely. Her reputation was destroyed. Her position in the household was fragile. She had enemies who enjoyed stepping on her. But her surname was Han. Her father was one of the most powerful men in the kingdom. And most importantly, Everyone believed she was stupid. That was not a weakness. That was cover. I exhaled slowly. If I couldn't go back, then I would survive. Not as Han Siorin, but as the woman who once controlled chaos itself. I didn't need to become brilliant overnight. That would attract suspicion. I didn't need revenge immediately. That would expose my hand. What I needed was time, discipline, and misdirection. First objective: fix the most visible problem. This body. I couldn't control rumors or manipulate people if I couldn't even stand properly. Second objective: observe silently. Learned who hated me, who pitied me, who wanted me dead. Third objective: rebuild reputation, slowly, invisibly. In crisis management, the worst mistake was announcing change. Real power moved quietly. When the servants brought in breakfast, 10 dishes heavy with oil and sugar, I didn't shout. I looked at them calmly and said, "From today onward, I will eat only plain vegetables, thin rice gruel, and water." They stared at me as if I'd lost my mind. The head maid nearly dropped the tray. "Miss, you'll faint." I smiled faintly. "If anyone brings me sweets or fatty meat again, write your name down. I'll personally hand the list to my father." Silence. Fear moved faster than reason. That was the first change. Small, but irreversible. That night, lying alone in the dark, my heart pounded, not with fear, but with something sharper. Anticipation. Because for the first time since arriving in this broken body, I felt something familiar. The calm before a storm. And storms were my specialty. The second morning after I woke up in this body, the atmosphere and the manner subtly changed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't obvious. But people who survived court politics learned to sense danger the way animals sensed rain. Servants began to lower their heads when passing my courtyard. Footsteps outside my door lingered longer than necessary. Someone was watching. That was when I realized something important. My survival wasn't the only thing at stake. My existence itself had value. And that value had already been placed on a chessboard I hadn't seen yet. The answer came unexpectedly that afternoon. My father summoned me. Not through an order. Through a messenger who spoke far more carefully than servants usually did. His Excellency requests the young lady's presence. Requests, not commands. That alone told me everything. When I arrived at his study, I saw a man who carried the weight of an entire kingdom on his shoulders. Han Myung-ho, Chief State Counselor. A man whose faction could sway ministers, silence censors, and even pressure the throne itself. He didn't smile when he saw me. He also didn't frown. Instead, he studied me the way one evaluated an object, calculating, weighing, deciding whether it was worth saving. "You've changed," he said. It wasn't a question. I lowered my head respectfully and answered with the voice Han Siorin used to have, slow, unsure, restrained. "I only wish to trouble Father less." That was the safest answer. He stared at me for a long moment, then gestured for me to sit. What he said next almost made my breathing stop. "You were meant to marry the crown prince." My fingers tightened inside my sleeves. So that was it. Not a rumor. Not speculation. A plan. He continued calmly, as if discussing the weather. "Years ago, the late queen hinted at strengthening ties between the royal family and the Han clan. The crown prince needs a consort from a powerful household. I was willing. Willing. Not hopeful. Not dreaming. Willing to force destiny into compliance. But," he added, his gaze hardening slightly, "your condition made it impossible." There was no cruelty in his words. Only disappointment. In court politics, disappointment killed more effectively than anger. "I fought for the possibility," he said quietly, "even when others mocked me." Mocked him. That was new. Han Siorin had always believed she was abandoned. She had never known her father had been fighting battles she couldn't see. I lowered my head further. I know I am unworthy. No, he corrected. You were inconvenient. The difference mattered. In this court, worth can be manufactured. Inconvenience cannot. He stood, walking toward the window. The crown prince will soon reach the age where a decision must be made. Once another family secures that position, our leverage weakens. He turned back to me. If you cannot become useful, you will become expendable. That was the warning. And the opportunity. When I left the study, my back was damp with cold sweat. Not from fear. From clarity. I finally understood why I had been allowed to live so comfortably despite being despised. Why my stepmother never dared push too far. Why my father never completely erased me. I wasn't a daughter. I was a political backup plan. A failed investment that might still be salvaged. And that was something I knew how to work with. That night, the servants' whispers sharpened. Someone had leaked the fact that I'd been summoned privately. Eyes watched me from behind paper windows. My stepmother's courtyard lights stayed on long past midnight. She knew. If I regained even a fraction of value, her son would lose everything. The next morning, she made her move. A lavish breakfast appeared in my courtyard. Not carried by servants. Carried by her personally. She smiled warmly, placing the dishes down as if performing charity. You've been suffering too much lately, she said gently. Your body cannot endure such extremes. I looked at the food. Braised meats. Honey pastries. Rich soup. A trap. If I ate it, I would fail. If I refused rudely, I would expose hostility. So I chose the third option. I smiled. Mother is right. Her eyes brightened. Then I calmly pushed the tray aside. But endurance is exactly what I need right now. Her smile stiffened. I heard father was disappointed in me, I continued softly. If I fail again, I don't think he'll protect me anymore. That sentence hit harder than any threat. Because it placed responsibility on her. If I collapsed, she would be blamed. Her fingers tightened around her sleeves. She forced a laugh and stood. Then take care. After she left, I realized something important. She was afraid. Not of me, but of what I might become. From that day onward, my routine intensified. I didn't just walk. I trained my breathing. I timed my meals. I slept precisely. In crisis management, discipline was everything. You didn't panic when pressure rose. You controlled the variables. And the most visible variable was my body. Week by week, the changes became undeniable. My steps grew steadier. My breathing quieter. My face, still round, began to sharpen subtly. People noticed. They always did. But instead of praise, suspicion followed. How long will it last? She's pretending. A pig doesn't turn into a phoenix. I welcomed the doubt. Because belief invited attention. Doubt invited neglect. One evening, as I returned from walking the outer corridor, I heard servants whispering excitedly. The crown prince will attend the upcoming spring banquet. My steps slowed. The spring banquet. A battlefield disguised as celebration. Where noble daughters were paraded like merchandise. Where futures were decided with smiles and glances. Han Siorin had never been invited before. She had never been worth displaying. I returned to my room and sat quietly in the dark. Then I smiled. Because this time, they would see me. Not as a bride. Not as a beauty. But as something far more dangerous. An option. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you won't miss. The invitation was supposed to reach my courtyard before noon. That much I learned later. It carried the seal of the royal household, subtle, understated, but unmistakable. The spring banquet was not merely a gathering. It was the kind of event where futures were tested quietly, where one look could change a person's standing forever. My father had already spoken of it. Not openly, but with the kind of restrained pride that powerful men rarely allowed themselves. He had mentioned my name during a private discussion with his aides. He had casually remarked that his daughter had finally learned restraint and discipline. He had even hinted, just once, that the Han household might soon surprise the capital. For a man like him, that was boasting. He had intended to place me before everyone's eyes. Not as a joke, but as proof. I never received the invitation. That day passed quietly. Too quietly. The morning light shifted to afternoon. The incense in my room burned down to ash. No servant came to announce anything unusual. No message arrived. No preparation was requested. At first, I thought nothing of it. In crisis work, silence often meant delay, not disaster. By evening, however, something felt wrong. The manor buzzed with restrained excitement. Servants whispered while carrying fresh garments. Courtyard lanterns were polished. The atmosphere wasn't for an ordinary dinner. They were preparing for something. Just not with me. I stopped a young maid outside my door. "What's going on tonight?" I asked casually. She froze, then lowered her head too quickly. "This servant doesn't know." A lie. A bad one. I smiled and let her go. That was when I knew. Someone had intercepted something meant for me. The truth surfaced the following morning. Not from a servant. From my father's silence. He did not summon me for breakfast. He did not ask for me that afternoon. By evening, his aide delivered a brief message. His Excellency is displeased. No reason given. No explanation. Displeasure from a man like Han Myung-ho was not loud. It was cold. Later that night, I finally learned what had happened. The spring banquet had taken place. The crown prince had attended. Several noble daughters had been presented. My name had been expected, but I hadn't appeared. My stepmother's move was elegant. She had intercepted the invitation under the guise of household management. She had told the messenger that I was unwell, too fragile to attend such a grand event. She had even expressed concern that my recent changes were unstable, that sudden exposure might cause embarrassment. And she had done it all politely, reasonably, as if protecting the family's dignity. By the time the truth could be questioned, the banquet was already over. The damage was done. When I was finally summoned 2 days later, my father's expression was darker than I had ever seen. "You did not attend." It wasn't a question. I lowered my head. I was never informed. His fingers paused on the teacup. For a brief moment, something flickered in his eyes. Doubt. Then disappointment overtook it. "You knew how important that banquet was." I swallowed. "In the court, excuses are meaningless," he continued. "Opportunity does not wait." That sentence hurt more than any rebuke, because it told me something clearly. He had believed in me. Just enough. And I had failed, at least in his eyes. "I spoke of you," he said quietly. "I told them my daughter had changed." Silence followed. Heavy. Unforgiving. "If you cannot even appear when summoned," he said, standing, "then perhaps nothing has truly changed." I bowed deeply. Not in panic. In resolve. Because now I understood the battlefield clearly. This was no longer about weight, or reputation, or survival. This was about timing. And someone had deliberately stolen mine. That night, I didn't confront my stepmother. I didn't accuse. I didn't cry. Instead, I sat in my room and replayed the sequence calmly. Invitation intercepted. Father misled. Public absence framed as incompetence. A classic move. Subtle. Bloodless. Effective. In crisis management, there was a rule for this kind of sabotage. Never expose the hand too early. Let the enemy believe the move succeeded. Then strike where they least expect it. 3 days later, rumors began spreading in the capital. Not loud ones. Carefully placed ones. That the Han family had intended to present their legitimate daughter. That something had gone wrong internally. That perhaps the daughter was not absent by choice. People love unfinished stories. They lean toward curiosity faster than truth. By the time my stepmother realized what was happening, it was too late. Questions were forming. And questions were dangerous. My father summoned me again. This time, his gaze was sharper. Did you know about the banquet? I learned afterward, I answered honestly. He studied me. You did not complain. I didn't see the use. A pause. Then, unexpectedly, a faint nod. That single gesture told me I hadn't lost everything. Not yet. Outside my courtyard that evening, I overheard servants whispering. They say there will be another chance. They say His Excellency won't let it end like this. I closed my eyes and smiled. Because the stepmother had won a battle. But she had revealed her position. And now, I knew exactly how to dismantle her. Slowly. Publicly. Irreversibly. If you want to see how she turns a stolen invitation into a public reversal, subscribe, like the video, and stay tuned. What I didn't know then was that the spring banquet was never just a mistake. It was a test. And I was not the one being tested. The first sign came from a rumor that should never have reached my ears. The Queen had asked about me. Not publicly. Not formally. Casually. That alone was terrifying. The Queen was the Crown Prince's mother. She rarely concerned herself with unmarried noble daughters unless they were already standing on the edge of destiny. And now she was watching me. My stepmother had not acted alone. That truth revealed itself slowly, like poison seeping into water. She had been entering the palace far more frequently than usual. Each visit was justified, offering tea, discussing embroidery, attending women's rights. Nothing suspicious on the surface. But in court politics, frequency itself was a message. The Queen and my stepmother shared a common enemy. My father. Han Myung-ho did not merely advise the king. He controlled him. Appointments. Edicts. Silence. Nothing passed the throne without brushing against my father's shadow. And now he wanted more. He wanted blood ties. The Crown Prince. If my father became the Crown Prince's father-in-law, the balance of power would tilt permanently. The Queen would become irrelevant. Her son would grow up under another man's grip. She could not allow that. So she struck first. Quietly. Through my stepmother. The missed banquet was only the opening move. The real plan was far uglier. They didn't want to reject me openly. They wanted me to disqualify myself. A week after my father's disappointment, a name resurfaced in the manor. Min Yiwan. The same man who had once humiliated this body publicly. The same man whose rejection had driven Han Siorin to her death. He returned to the capital suddenly. Not by coincidence. He requested an audience with my stepmother first. That alone told me everything. When his name was mentioned casually at dinner, I felt the servant's eyes dart toward me. He's matured, someone said carefully. They say he regrets his past behavior. He's become quite accomplished. All words designed to stir memory. Emotion. Weakness. My stepmother watched me over her teacup, pretending indifference. She wanted to see my reaction. Would I flinch? Would I blush? Would I lower my eyes like a foolish girl in love? I didn't. I continued eating calmly. That unsettled her. Later that night, she came to my courtyard personally. Smiling. Warm. She's changed so much, she said gently to the servants. It would be a shame if old wounds still haunted her. Then she looked at me. Yiwen has asked about you. Silence. In the past, he was young and foolish, she continued. People change. Perhaps fate wishes to give you closure. Closure. Such a kind word for manipulation. She wanted to know one thing. If I still desired him. If I would choose emotion over ambition. If I could be tempted into refusing the crown prince myself. Because if I rejected the match, the queen could remain blameless. My father would lose face. And I would be discarded without blood on anyone's hands. I smiled softly. People do change, I said. My stepmother relaxed slightly. Then I added calmly. But I don't revisit disasters once they've been contained. Her smile cracked. Just a little. That night, I lay awake and pieced everything together. The queen feared my father. My father wanted the crown prince. My stepmother wanted her son's future secured. And I was the lever. If I accepted the crown prince, the queen lost power. If I refused him for another man, my father's ambition collapsed. Either way, someone intended to use my heart as evidence. They assumed I had one that ruled me. That was their mistake. The next move came swiftly. An invitation arrived. Not from the palace. From Min Yiwen. Private. Respectful. Carefully worded. He requested to see me. To apologize. To explain. The servants buzzed with excitement. Old love rekindled. Fate's second chance. A foolish girl's weakness. I held the letter for a long time. Then I burned it. Unread. The following day, my stepmother confronted me. You didn't reply. There was nothing to reply to, I answered calmly. He humiliated you once, she said softly. Don't you want justice? I looked at her. Justice isn't listening to apologies, I said. It's becoming unreachable. Her face stiffened. Because now she understood. I wasn't reacting the way they planned. I wasn't running toward old affection. I wasn't rejecting the crown prince either. I was standing still. And in politics, stillness was defiance. That evening, my father summoned me again. His gaze was sharp, searching. The queen has expressed concerns, he said slowly. About me, I asked. She wonders where your loyalty lies. I lowered my head respectfully. My loyalty lies with the Han family. That was the safest answer. And the most dangerous one. Because it told him something important. I would not sabotage him. But I would not be controlled either. As I left the study, a realization settled calmly in my chest. The queen was testing me. My stepmother was baiting me. My father was watching me. 3 forces. 1 body. 1 choice that hadn't been made yet. And that was exactly where I wanted them. If you want to see how she turns an old humiliation into a weapon, like the video, subscribe, and stay with the story. Because the next meeting will not be about love. It will be about exposure. And someone will lose the right to smile in public ever again. I agreed to meet Min Yiwen. Not because I missed him, but because I needed to see whether the man standing before me was real, or merely another mask crafted by careful hands. The meeting took place in a quiet tea house outside the capital, discreet enough to avoid gossip, yet public enough to appear innocent. When he arrived, I almost didn't recognize him. He had lost the arrogance that once clung to him like perfume. His posture was restrained, his gaze steadier. Even his voice carried a caution that hadn't existed before. He bowed. Deeply. I owe you an apology, he said. I watched him carefully. This wasn't the boy who laughed while breaking a girl in public. This man had learned consequences, or at least learned how to imitate regret. We talked about trivial things, about the capital, about Chain. Against my will, I found the conversation tolerable, even pleasant. That disturbed me, because Min Yiwen was not foolish. If he had changed, it was either because life had humbled him, or because someone had taught him what to become. By the time we parted, I had confirmed one thing. He wasn't acting entirely, but he wasn't free either. Days later, I was summoned to the palace. Not as a candidate, not as a guest of honor, as an obligation. The crown prince received me in a side hall, his expression cold before I even finished bowing. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't invite me to sit. He looked at me the way one looked at a political document, necessary, unpleasant, unavoidable. "So," he said flatly, "you are the daughter my mother finds troublesome." That was his opening line. I straightened. "I did not request your attention, Your Highness." His eyes narrowed slightly. He circled me slowly, not hiding his disdain. "You lack refinement, you lack beauty, and yet your father believes you worthy of standing beside me." I met his gaze calmly. "Worth is not always visible." He laughed short and sharp. "You mistake restraint for dignity." That was when I knew. I didn't like him, not because he was rude, but because he believed power excused cruelty. When the meeting ended, there was no illusion left. The crown prince disliked me, and I had no intention of changing that. Unfortunately, my father disagreed. His anger was not explosive. It was worse. "You had one task," he said coldly, "make him tolerate you." "I cannot control his temperament." "You don't need affection," he snapped. "You need acceptance. Love is irrelevant." He leaned closer. "Do you think I fought the queen for nothing?" That sentence chilled me, because it confirmed what I already feared. This marriage was no longer an option. It was a strategy, and I was expected to submit. Min Yiwen, however, did not retreat. He began appearing where I least expected him. At the book pavilion, near the river path, outside my carriage. Each time polite, persistent. When I finally confronted him, my patience gone, I spoke sharply. "I am not interested." He didn't retreat. "I know," he said quietly. That startled me. "Then why are you here?" "Because you're being forced," he replied, "and I don't want to be another cage." I laughed bitterly. "You already were." His jaw tightened. "I was blind then," he said. "I'm not now." I turned away. "Leave," I said coldly. He didn't. And that was the problem. The situation worsened when the princess noticed. She had always been close to Min Yiwen. Too close. When she saw him watching me, waiting for me, choosing proximity over her, something dark entered her eyes. The palace began whispering again. Not about my weight, not about my reputation, but about my influence. The princess's smiles thinned whenever my name was mentioned. Her courtesy sharpened into something brittle. And hatred. Hatred is loud, even when it pretends to be silent. Then came the royal decree. The king intended to reward Min Yiwen with marriage to the princess, because rumors said he had once loved me, because the king believed giving him her hand would sever lingering attachments, because men in power always believed women were solutions. When I heard this, I finally understood Min Yiwen's restraint. He wasn't courting me. He was trapped. And now, so was I. The princess began to look at me differently. Not as a rival. As a thief. Even though I had taken nothing. Even though I wanted nothing. And that was the cruelest twist of all. If you're following this story, Like the video, subscribe and stay with us. Because the moment emotions collide with politics, someone always gets sacrificed, and the next sacrifice might not be willing. The change began subtly. Too subtly for most people to notice. But I noticed. The servants assigned to my carriage were replaced. The tea served in my courtyard tasted slightly different. Invitations that used to arrive on time began to come late, or not at all. The princess had made her first move. Not openly. Not foolishly. She had learned from the queen. The incident happened during a palace charity ceremony. On the surface, it was harmless. Noble ladies were invited to present offerings for the people displaced by floods in the southern provinces. It was meant to display virtue, generosity, and grace. In truth, it was a stage. I was placed beside the princess. Not by chance. She smiled at me warmly, held my hand in public, and spoke kindly enough that anyone watching would think we were close. Then, just as the offerings were about to be recorded, a palace maid cried out. One of the donation chests was empty. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Eyes turned. Whispers spread like sparks on dry grass. The maid trembled and pointed, hesitantly, fearfully, toward me. She was the last to touch it, the maid said. The accusation was soft, but lethal. I felt it then. That familiar tightening in my chest. The moment when chaos was about to bloom. And instinct took over. I didn't argue. I didn't panic. I didn't even look offended. I smiled. Then let us recount everything, I said calmly. The princess stiffened. The queen, seated above, leaned forward slightly. No one expected composure. They expected defense. And defense always sounded like guilt. The records were brought. Every chest. Every seal. Every name. Slowly. Painfully. Until the truth surfaced. The chest had never reached my hands. The maid had lied. Under pressure, she broke. And when she did, the name she cried out was not mine. It was the princess's personal attendant. Silence crashed down like thunder. The princess's hand slipped from mine. Her face went pale for just a moment. Just long enough. The queen intervened immediately. It is enough, she said coolly. A misunderstanding. But misunderstandings leave stains. That day, people began whispering something new. That the princess was insecure. That she acted hastily. That she feared me. Min Yuan found me that evening. His voice was low. You were targeted. I know. Why didn't you retaliate? I looked at him. Because retaliation ends games. I'm still playing. He studied me for a long time. Then said quietly, You've changed more than anyone realizes. I smiled faintly. You too. That was when I knew. He was no longer on anyone's side completely. Not the queen's. Not the princess. Not even mine. And that made him dangerous. My father summoned me again. This time, he didn't hide his frustration. The crown prince dislikes you, he said bluntly, but that can be fixed. I don't intend to fix it. He slammed his hand against the table. You don't get to intend anything. This marriage will happen. For power, I asked calmly. For stability, he corrected. I met his gaze steadily. And if I become unstable? That question unsettled him. He dismissed me without another word. The crown prince, however, did not forget our earlier meeting. When we crossed paths again at court, he stopped me publicly. You think silence is defiance, he said coldly. It is. I bowed. And you think authority inspires loyalty, I replied softly. It doesn't. Gasps echoed. The queen's nails dug into her sleeve. The crown prince's eyes darkened. In that moment, I made an enemy I could no longer avoid. The princess stopped pretending after that. Her smiles vanished. Her courtesy sharpened into humiliation, disguised as concern. She invited me to gatherings only to ignore me. She praised my progress, loudly enough to remind everyone of my past. And the court followed her lead. Slowly, cruelly. Then came the decree. The king announced his intention to marry the princess to Min Yiwan. The reason was simple: to prevent disorder. The princess smiled. Min Yiwan did not. And when his gaze found mine across the hall, I understood. This was no longer about choice. This was about control. That night, Min Yiwan came to my courtyard unannounced. "You can't stay here," he said quietly. "They will destroy you." I looked at him calmly. "They already tried." He stepped closer. "Then leave with me." I laughed softly. "And give them exactly what they want." He fell silent. Because we both knew. Running was surrender. The queen believed she had secured her son. The king believed he had resolved a problem. My father believed pressure would break me. The princess believed she had won. They were all wrong. Because none of them understood one thing. I had never wanted love. I had never wanted marriage. What I wanted was leverage. And they had just handed it to me. If you're still with this story, like, subscribe and stay tuned. Because the next move will not be quiet. And after it, nothing in the palace will remain balanced again.